Good morning, everyone. I hope that you had a wonderful time so far at our conference. My name is Mernaz. I am moderating this session. The session is interactive data visualization in Python. I'm excited to hear about that too. Following our presentation, our presenter's presentation, we will have some time at the end for QA. Please note that we will be recording this presentation and an accessible video will be available for viewing on the IT Professionals Conference website in the coming weeks. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful speakers, Sarah Stevens, Chris Enderman, for their presentation.
Hi, I'm Sarah Stevens, pronoun she, her, hers, and I'm a facilitator for the Data Science Hub here at UW-Madison. We teach a lot of workshops in the Data Science Hub, including several on Python. This is a fairly new workshop that's been developed as part of a global community of instructors that we were part of, and we ran it for the first time in December. And this is an hour-long preview of that particular workshop, so it's not going to be the full workshop, but we'll still get to do a little bit of interactivity that we normally have in our workshops, and we'll get to hopefully learn a little bit about how to make interactive data visualizations using some packages. I'm going to have Chris say hi. Chris is going to be in the chat to answer any questions you have, or if you run into issues trying to follow along with me, he'll be there to answer any of those questions. Chris, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Chris, and I'm also a data science facilitator in the Data Science Hub. And as Sarah mentioned, I'm here to support you. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop questions in the chat, and I can help you work through your problem during the workshop.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so in a longer workshop, this workshop is typically about 3 hours long, maybe closer to 4. We would have you start from scratch with the code, but instead we're actually going to give you the beginning of an application, the beginning of a visualization, and then we'll learn a little bit more about some of the features so we can improve that visualization. And I'll talk through the code as we go through it as well. To give you an example, let me turn on my screen share here of what I mean when I'm talking about an interactive plot here. Here is an example of the plot that we make in the full workshop. We'll get some of this, but not all of it. And so this is an interactive plot, not only because you can actually interact like hovering over points and seeing what they are. That's the Plotly features because it's plotted with the Plotly package in Python. You can also actually remove lines by clicking on them if you don't want to see them in the plot. And there's some other zooming in and out you can do interactively. But in addition to those features that come with this being a Plotly plot, which is an interactive plot by default, we also have these features that are part of the Streamlit application, the Streamlit package that we're using in Python, which we can see on the left-hand side here. There's this sidebar that you can pop out, and you can change what the plot actually displays. So the user looking at this plot can decide, I actually want to look at Europe instead. And then as soon as that selection is chosen, they switch into seeing that particular plot. They could also change the metric that they're looking at. Right now it's GDP per capita, but instead we could look at life expectancy in all of these countries across different years. We can also change which lines are showing here. I showed before that you could click on each of them, but in addition, this panel on the left-hand side lets us remove them all and say we want to look at a particular country. We can search it and add it in, so we can add in countries one by one into our plot. We can also change the years with this slider here. We can change what years we're viewing in our plot, and we can decide that we want to show the data for the plot underneath it if we check this box. And so we'll create something in this workshop that looks a little bit like this. It won't have all the features yet to it, but we'll have some features to it. All right. A lot of times when you're preparing plots like this, you're going to be testing them out and working as you develop them on your local computer and viewing them locally. However, to make installation easy and easy for you to follow along here, I'm going to be using a cloud development platform called Gitpod, which lets us use a Git repository and create a development environment around it very easily. And so I would love it if anyone wants to follow along, you can do so by going to this repository that I'm about to open here, and I put it in chat as well. And here I have some of the setup steps for us opening that Gitpod environment that I mentioned. And so this repository is specifically for this session, and it has some setup steps that you can follow along here. To start out with, you'll need to have a GitHub account. So you'll need to either sign into GitHub or create a GitHub account there. I'm going to pause for a minute, at least 20 seconds or so to give everybody a chance to sign into GitHub or create an account. And then I'll go ahead with the Gitpod environment there. If you've successfully opened your GitHub account or started to create an account, signed in or started to create a GitHub account, you can help me out by clicking at the bottom of Zoom. There's a reactions button. And if you've got GitHub signed in or an account, put in a green check mark there. If you're working on it and you'd like me to give you a little bit more time, you can click on that reactions button at the bottom of Zoom and choose the red X if you need more time and you'd like me to wait a little bit for you. If you don't plan to participate, you can put nothing up and you can watch me instead of following along. Go ahead and sign into GitHub or create a GitHub account if you don't have one already. Give us a little longer for anyone else who wants to follow along. Remember, first thing we need to do is sign into GitHub so we can get into that developer environment. And if you've done so, go ahead and put up your green check mark using the reactions button at the bottom of Zoom. Choose that green check mark and I'll know that you've done that. If you're working on it and would like me to wait a little bit for you to create that GitHub account, you can put up that red X and I'll know that you're still working on it. All right, I'll go ahead and move forward with the demo. And the next thing we do after we sign into GitHub or create an account is click this button in the repository I put the link to in chat. I'll put the link in chat again, just in case folks have joined us since. And in that link, there's a button that says Open in Gitpod. I recommend right-clicking and choosing Open Link in New Tab. That way you can still have this repository up and the directions we wrote out here. I'll say mine is going to look a little bit different. If this is the first time you've opened Gitpod, there's going to be a couple steps in here that I won't get that you will. The first is there's going to be a screen that pops up that asking you if you want to continue with your GitHub credentials, and you can choose continue and it'll log in with your GitHub credentials. This avoids you having to make a separate account for Gitpod to work with it. And it works very closely with GitHub, so I often use my GitHub credentials with it. And then there should be a pop-up about authorizing Gitpod to connect with GitHub, and that connects those two accounts together. And so I recommend choosing the authorize GitHub IO option. And then after that, it's going to pop up something asking about the editor option that you want to use. And there's a few options, and you may have a favorite editor, but if you want to work in the browser window, I think you have to choose the VS Code. Otherwise, it's going to try and pop up your editor outside the browser window. And when you click that option, leave the latest release unchecked. We don't need the latest release. And then you can click the continue button. And then let me actually switch to mine, which should be open by now. Once you've gone through those steps, which are listed here in the repository, Yeah, Gitpod is pretty cool. I really love it. It's really nice for looking at different things you want to develop in GitHub typically. I use it a lot of times with things that I want to be able to preview things in a browser. So I want to be able to run a little server in the back end to preview changes to a web page or something in the browser. And so that's very similar to what we're doing today. Here we have our text, our editor, our developer environment here. And the way this is set up, it actually automatically launched our Streamlit app for us. The repository itself has this app.py in it. So if we click on that, we can see this is the initial code for our app that we'll go through in a second. But it also started up a little server inside our Gitpod environment here that's running Streamlit for us to display the app. Again, this would all be on your local machine if you installed all the Streamlit functions and packages locally. But in our case, we're going to be developing it in this developer environment here. And so you should see in the terminal window at the bottom that your Streamlit app is launched. If you don't, then you want to type Streamlit run app.py, and I'll type that in chat so that you have it. It should have launched though when we started up this environment because of the way I configured our Gitpod environment here. But if it's not running, if you don't see this output at the bottom of your terminal window, then you want to type Streamlit run app.py and it should start it up for you. All right, it is running and it's showing to inside our Gitpod environment, and to see what that actually looks like in the browser, we need to click on this Remote Explorer button on the left-hand side. This panel looks like a little monitor with like a greater than and less than sign and a circle in the corner. And when we click that, it's showing us that it has some ports that are open that we're seeing the browser displayed in. Here there's a couple options that you can choose for how you want to view it. You can view it side by side. So if I click this first button, the button in the middle here, it's going to display the preview of that application to side by side with my app. So I can see the code and then I can see the app here on the right hand side. Alternatively, I can pop up a new browser window by clicking the other button here with I think of this as the like World Wide Web icon. That icon there, it'll pop up the display in another tab. I think I'm going to keep mine up in a separate tab and switch back and forth between tabs because I have limited space in which to show you things. And so I will be keeping it open separately, and I'm going to actually close this window. See if I can close this one. And I only have it up in a separate tab. All right, so let's talk about what we're seeing here. So this application here, we have an application that uses the Gapminder data. We should take a look at what the Gapminder data looks like before we dig into the code. And so if I go back to the Explorer option on my left-hand side here, I can see that I have a data folder, and in it I have this Gapminder_tidy CSV. And so this is a tidy, cleaned up version of the Gapminder data set. And so for every country listed, it has 3 entries per year, one for each of the 3 metrics that we have in the data. So there's one GDP per capita, there's one life expectancy value, and there's one population value for each year and each country. It also has a column for continent. So that's kind of a preview of what the data we're working with looks like. All right, let's get back to our application. So what we did here with the application is we first imported Streamlit, which is the library and application that actually allows us to display that app. We also imported Pandas, which is a data manipulation library that's really good for working with tabular data. So it's nice for our data because we have a nice tidy table that we imported. And then we also have Plotly Express imported, so that allows us to use Plotly to plot our data. All right, so the first thing we're doing in this first chunk here of code is setting up the app. So we actually told Streamlit using the the short name for Streamlit, to set the layout to wide. It looks a little nicer with wide, so I left that configuration in. It also creates a title. So here's a function with Streamlit that lets us add a title to our app. So if we look at this piece of code here, it's actually responsible for showing this title here in our actual application. And then the next piece of code, while not showing in our application, is really important because it is actually reading in the data that we're going to use, and we're saving it to a variable called df. And then the next step is actually we're hard coding in a particular query of the data that we want to see in our figure. And right now it's hard coded in, but over the course of the next, hopefully about 30 minutes, we will be changing this so that it's not hard coded in, and instead the user can choose which continent and which metric they'd like to see. And so here we're querying our data, so we're subsetting our data down to only the entries where the continent is Oceania and the metric is GDP per capita. And so then we have our filtered version of the data. And then finally, this last section is where we plot it. And so here we gave it a plot title, and then we created that plot using the filtered data, so only the Oceania and GDP data. And we said we want the x-axis to be year, the y-axis to be the value column, so those are the actual GDP numbers. And then the country is, but we want to color each line by the country. Forgot to mention this is a line plot that's in the function right there. And so we want to color each line by the country, want the title to be specified by this title line above. And then there's some labels here. So we want to change it so the x-axis or the y-axis doesn't say value. Instead, it says GDP per cap. So that's a labels matchup for us there. And then finally, here we tell Streamlit to actually display the Plotly chart. And so this line here is what, after the figure is created, this line here is what actually puts this figure into our application. Okay, I went through the code really quickly there of what we're seeing in the app. Type in chat, what are your questions that you have so far about the setup of this application? So far pretty quiet in chat, but if I see anything pop up, I will answer it. Let's begin to customize our plot a little bit here. So the first thing we've noticed is there's a few Streamlit functions that we're using here. One is to set the configuration, another is to set the title, and then finally to show the Plotly chart. But there's a lot of Streamlit functions that we might want to use, and we can look at the Streamlit documentation, but what I really like is this cheat sheet that I put in chat. It gives us a nice cheat sheet of some of the important functions, and so when you're wanting to display text, here's some useful functions there. If you're wanting to display data, there's some functions here, images, other pieces. So these are a lot of the functions that we need to add different elements to our application. And so let's test out one. In particular, let's add a line under our plot. So right now our plot has nothing underneath it. And so let's add something under our plot that is a text description of that plot. And so to do so, if we take a look at our cheat sheet and we want to display text, there's a couple of options. We can do display text with the text function here. I kind of like writing things in Markdown, so it can add a little formatting if I want to. So I'm going to go ahead and use the Markdown function, although for now I think I'm going to mostly use plain text, but I'll go ahead and use the Markdown function in case later I want to add some additional formatting to that text. All right, so back in my application here, I will go ahead and add ST for Streamlit, Markdown, open parentheses, quotation marks, and then I'm going to type a description of this plot. So this plot shows the GDP per capita for countries in the Oceania, I guess, Oceania region. I think I just want to say in Oceania. There we go. All right, so I've created this new line, and I'm going to go ahead and save it. I'm going to press Command or Control S to save in this text editor. Get a new version of it saved. And then I'm going to go over to my application and see what it looks like here. And you notice it still looks the same at the moment, but you might have seen this little pop-up in the upper right-hand corner, which says the source file has changed. And you can choose always rerun, and it'll keep rerunning as we change the data. I like to rerun it intentionally, so I'm going to click the rerun button. It'll only rerun it once, but it reran my app for me, and now I can see that I have this new addition that is the plot, or the text description of the plot. All right, let's try a challenge. So this is a challenge for the group here. I think there were about 16 people who put their green check marks up before, so I'll try and wait for about 16 people to put text up or put up their green check mark. And so for the challenge, go ahead and look through the cheat sheet that I put in chat and try and display the data table that's used to create the plot. So write yourself some code here to have the data table show below. When you've given that a try or want to go over the answer together, go ahead and put that green check mark up and we'll go through the result together. As you work on this challenge, if you have questions in chat, please go ahead and type them in chat. Chris is anxiously awaiting you to type things in chat so he can help with them. So please add questions, or if you run into a bug or something, let us know in chat. Again, when you've tried this challenge or have completed it or don't know where to start and want me to go over the answer, go ahead and put up that green check mark. I'll wait till we get maybe 10 or 12 people with check marks up. All right, looks like a lot of folks have gotten a chance to try this. Let's go over the answer together. I'm gonna remove challenge from my notes, although I think I left it in some of my preparation. So I want to display the data table used to create the plot. So if we go and take a look at the cheat sheet at our data display section, it says we can use a function called data frame to display a particular data frame, which is the format our data is in. And so we can type st.dataframe, open parentheses, and the data we want to display is only the data that's used in the table, which is this def filtered data frame. If we go ahead and save that, and then so I hit Command S to save it, and now I'm going to switch back over to my application. You can see it recognized the source file has changed, but hasn't changed the app itself yet, and so I'll go ahead and rerun my app here. And now we can see the data table displayed here for all of the data that's in this data table. Question about if you can use other types of plots in Streamlit. You can absolutely use other type of plots. So if I had a static plot from matplotlib, for example, here, it would still be showing that here. I think it's probably a different function, but you can display a different plot as well. All right, let's go back to our application. So we tried out adding the data table. Now we need to think about how to make this application more flexibly, like more robust, more flexible to user input. Right now, we've really hard coded in the Oceania and GDP per cap pieces. And so we want to make these into variables so that we can actually create inputs that are the user displays that go into those variables, and then we use those variables when we do our query. So we need to make this more flexible. And so the first thing we really need to do is filter out or add some lines here to specify what to create variables for the continent and metric. So we'll go ahead and create a continent, which I for some reason always want to spell wrong when I type it, continent, and then we'll still save it as Oceania for now. Oceania. And then we'll also create a metric variable here, and we'll have that one be GDP per cap. So for now, we're going to keep them the same hard-coded variables, but we're going to change it. So instead, these variables are going to specify what the query is. And to do that, we can actually use formatted strings or F strings in Python to change our query here. And so we can change this to a formatted string by adding an F to the beginning of it. And then now we can do variable substitution directly into this string. And so we can add 2 square brackets and tell it we want to put the continent variable here. And then we can do the same thing here. We'll add 2 curly brackets. And did I say square before? I meant curly. Curly brackets and metric here. And this will sub in the metric variable instead. And so let's test our application with these new changes that we've created. So we'll go ahead and save it. I pressed Command S or Control S if you're on Windows. Let's go back and look at our Streamlit app, and I'll rerun it. And I did something wrong because it is not displaying my application right. Let's see what it is. I probably have a typo in here somewhere. Call it out in chat if you see it. GDP per cap. Oh, thank you. It's not a capital C in GDP per cap. Good catch. Thanks, Greg. All right, so I resaved that with our typo fixed, and I'm going to go back to my application and rerun it. It looks exactly like it did before when we had the variables hard-coded into the query, but it's now in a form that'll make it easier for us to move on with. And we can actually see what happens when we change the variables here. So we can manually change this to Europe, and we'll change this one to pop for population. And if we save that, go back to our app and rerun it. Now we can see that we have different values are showing up. We're seeing the countries of Europe. One of the things that's not great about this right now, right, is that it still says GDP per cap. We still have GDP for countries in Oceania as our title. And so a bunch of our other pieces were hard-coded in as well. And so we need to make some changes there to actually make the title and axis labels changed based on the input. So let's go and use the formatted F strings to fix those as well. So back in our application here, we want to change, we need the title for 1. So we need to make the title an F string, a formatted string. And then we want it to say the metric here. So we'll add this metric variable. And then here at the end, we'll change it to say the continent. And then we need to change some of our figure information as well. So right now it automatically labels the value with GDP per cap, but instead we want it to actually label it with the metric. So we need to change it to square brackets here and then metric. And we need to make this an F string, so it'll sub it in the variable for us. So all these changes are going to make our application more flexible when we actually have user input. It's going to change what's displayed more flexibly. I think those are all the changes I needed to make for displaying it. I'm going to save it. So I hit Control S and then I switch back I'm going to rerun my application. Now it says pop. That's not the prettiest display of a label, but in the full workshop, we actually cover how to sub out these into nicer strings, but we're going to skip that for this moment. All right, and so now it changes so far it doesn't change the line below. And so that's actually your challenge, is to update the plot description to use the labels, the formatted strings that we were using before, our new variables, sorry. Let's go ahead and give that a try. I'll give you a minute and a half-ish. And if you've completed this challenge, you can go ahead and put the green check mark up. So I'll put it on screen too, because I realize it's not showing. So, all right, here. Update the plot description to use formatted strings as well. All right, let's go over this one together. Ooh, there's a question that my text needs to be bigger. Thanks for letting me know. I'm sorry I didn't check in about that sooner. How's that size? Oh, in the Streamlit. Sorry, now I'm reading the chat. Let me check. You have examples where people on campus have put this sort of thing into production. Deanna, I don't have examples of it. However, you can actually use this with Do-It's Research Cyber Infrastructure hosts RStudio Connect server that makes, or sorry, not, it's RStudio Connect. RStudio Connect that lets you publish things like Shiny apps, and you can actually publish Streamlit apps in the same thing as well. I don't have an example of it though, but it is possible to publish Streamlit apps through that same portal. Is the text okay? Yeah, okay, I see it. Daniel has replied that the text is better there. Okay, thanks for letting me know. All right, let's go over this challenge result together. And so this is a practice of us using F strings in Python. We need to change the markdown one. Instead of saying GDP per cap, we're going to sub in metric again, and in Oceania, we're going to change this to be continent. All right, and then if we go ahead and save that and redisplay our app, we can see that now it changes more automatically what the description is as well. All right, let's get into adding widgets that'll let the user display what they want to see. And so we're going to first create a widget that lets the user select which continent is displayed in the graph. So let's look back at our cheat sheet again. And so here, I think the widgets are at the bottom, if I recall. Yeah, so display interactive widgets is the section we're looking for. And here is a list of a bunch of functions that allow us to create different widgets for user input. And in our case, we're going to be using the, let's see, select box option. So this select box option, it lets you have a label telling the user kind of what to do, and then you can give it a list of items to select from, and it gives a drop-down menu. And so let's add one of those to our applications. So back in our app, we need to do this before we filter our data. So in this section where we're working with the continent and metric information. But before we actually do this, for our select box, we actually need a list of all the continents. So before we filter the data, let's add another section here to get list of options. And so we want to get the list of the options that the users can use in our select box. And so for that, we need a continent list. So continent underscore list is what we'll call it. And then we're going to make a list of the data frame, square bracket, quotation mark, continent column. So this is our way of selecting a particular column from our data frame in Pandas. And from that, we want to make it to unique. So we'll add the unique function at the end. Unique. And then we need to format the result of that unique into a list. And so we wrapped it in a list function there as well. I'm going to paste that in chat because that's probably more code than I wrote it once in this workshop yet so far. All right, so now we have a list of all the continents that the user can choose from. Next, we need to change our continent. So instead of being hard-coded in here, it uses that select box widget that we talked about before. So we'll type ST for Streamlit and then select box. And then the first argument is label, but I'm going to write it out explicitly. Label equals, and then we'll say choose a continent for our label. And then for the options, which is the second argument, but I'm going to write it out explicitly here as well, we'll say for the options, we want you to use our continent list. All right. I'm going to share that in chat in case you'd like to see it too. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save. So Command S again, and then I'll switch back to my app. And now I'm going to rerun. And oops, I accidentally did something wrong there. I think I wrote option instead of options. Yep. And so the argument is actually options. So I'll save that and rerun it. So if you use my code, you're going to have to correct it to options instead. And so now we see this select box at the top of our application. And so now we can actually switch the continent by clicking this drop-down menu and choosing a different continent. And it switches the display plot, it switches the title, it switches the text, and it switches what the data is shown below. All right, here's our next challenge. I want you to do the same thing, add a select box for choosing the metric. So go back to your app and update the app to add a select box for choosing the metric. And when you've completed that, go ahead and put up that green check mark again. We'll add in a typical workshop. I'm going to wait a little bit longer for a larger percentage of the attendees to do the challenge, but let's go over the challenge together. And so we need to make, again, a select box that lets the user choose the metric that is displayed. And so we're going to add to our get list of options chunk that we want a metric list as well, which is the list where we take the column that's called metric. At least I think that's what it's called. Let me double check. Yep, metric. And then we want to take only the unique values, and we'll have our list of items from that. And then we need to change metric here to use a select box. We want the label to be something like choose a metric. And then our options, again, are going to come from that metric list. Now let's save and go back to our application and rerun it. Now we have two drop downs where we can customize which country we're looking at and which metric we're seeing as well in our application. All right, so in my example one that I showed at the beginning of this workshop, all these options were kind of hidden in the sidebar instead of directly in front of, on top of our application here. And so let's learn how to make these show up in a sidebar instead of at the top of our application here. And so to do that, there's a couple ways you can put things into a sidebar. One is by, I think, if you add sidebar here in the function. The other one lets you do it with a with statement, and I think I'd like to use the with statement instead. So here we're going to have, and this lets us add text to that sidebar as well with the with statement, which is why I'm going to prefer it here. And so here I'm going to add with st.sidebar. So using our sidebar from the Streamlit sidebar function from the Streamlit application. And then we need to indent our continent and metric widgets here, and that'll put them into the sidebar. In addition, let's add a header to our sidebar that's with the st.subheader function. Oop, typo. And we'll say configure the plot. So this will add a little header to our sidebar that says that you're configuring the plot. All right, let's save that. And switch back to our app and rerun it. Now we have our configure the plot sidebar that we can collapse if we don't want to see it, and see it if we'd prefer to change things in the plot. All right. I had one more challenge. I think I'm gonna skip that challenge and go over my last few things. If you'd like to try the last challenge on your own, it is to add a checkbox widget to the app that controls whether the data table at the bottom displays or not. And I will post the result of that right at the end of this in chat so that you can have that, how to do that. But before that, I'd like to go over my wrap up things and then open it up to questions. So there are a lot of different things we can do to this dashboard. We could have finished adding the table showing checkbox. We could have also fixed the labels. We could create those sliders to show only particular years. We could also add that option to search for particular countries and add them to the plot. In addition to those features that we could add to the dashboard itself, right now this dashboard, we've been previewing it as we developed it in this environment, but it's not published as a dashboard. And to do so, we also would probably want to publish it. You could publish it directly with Streamlit.io, which is how my example one, this is the example one, I believe. This one is published on Streamlit.io, and it allows you a certain number of free apps that are going on at any given time within limits. But you can also publish it using RStudio Connect that I mentioned before that DeWitt's Research Cyber Infrastructure Group hosts. And so you can publish Streamlit apps that way as well. I'd like to get an example of that and create my own version there, but I haven't done that yet. In addition, if you would like to learn more about this particular function, the Python interactive data visualizations, you can come to our workshop in the fall. We will host this as a half day, probably 3.5-hour workshop sometime in the fall. And you can see all of the workshops that the Data Science Hub hosts here at our training resources website. And we'll put on other half-day workshops throughout the fall semester, but between now and then, we also have workshops teaching things like the Unix shell, Python, introduction to Python, introduction to R, Git, SQL, a bunch of different very useful skills targeted at researchers primarily. And we'll have some that are on like genomics, some that are domain non-specific. We have some that teach geospatial data in R. And so we have a lot of workshops coming up over the summer, and in fall, we'll have some workshops as well. The final version of the app that I was showing before, I'm going to put that in chat too. So if you want to play with the app that I'm showing right now, you can. It is deployed online so you can see it. And if you're interested in these workshops like this, or if you're familiar with Python, Unix shell, Git, R, SQL, etc., and want to improve your own skills or learn to teach workshops like this, I recommend joining the UW Carpentry's instructional community. So that's our local instructional community that teaches the workshops that I just mentioned. It's a community of instructors. We develop all of our lessons in the open. So the lesson that this is from, let me link that. I actually realized I never gave you the direct lesson. I don't have it easily accessible. I will put it in a second if Chris doesn't beat me to it. So this is an openly shared lesson that anyone can teach across the world. And in fact, someone, not me, developed it at another institution, and I've since taught it and customized it. And so all of our lessons are openly developed so that we can improve the lessons as they get taught and improve our teaching skills together as well. The Data Science Hub hosts about 15 workshops a year teaching these skills. Each workshop has instructors at the front, but also helpers who help find typos for learners. So no one did this in chat, so I'm kind of shocked, but no one posted their code in chat being like, I'm getting an error, which happens all the time in our workshops. And we actually encourage learners to actually put that into the chat so that we can help them find those errors. Or in person, we sneak up behind and look to see on your screen and figure out where that typo is usually. And so if you want to join as an instructor or want to join our community as a helper, we value all types of contributions. So if you're interested in becoming a part of our Carpentries community, we would love to have you involved, whatever roles you're comfortable with. And we also have monthly, although they're going on hiatus for the summer, but monthly instructor development meetings where we talk about the philosophy, why we teach the way we do, and inclusivity and other important parts of teaching. And we also have instructor training, so you can become a certified Carpentries instructor if you're interested in that as well. In addition, we're developing new lessons all the time. This lesson is, in fact, as I mentioned before, one of the newer lessons that's being developed, and it's in what's called the incubator. So it's a fairly new lesson that's being taught and improved. We are also starting to teach a workshop on lesson development itself so that you can learn how to create these open collaborative lessons for a place like the incubator where others can teach them and improve them. Okay. So I've talked a bit about Carpentries. We've talked about the Streamlit application. I'm going to stop my screen share now and open it up for any questions folks have about Streamlit and the data visualizations we did, or the Carpentries community, joining the instructional community, or workshops like this that we host. If you have questions, you think you can type them in chat, or I'm also open to people raising their hand and unmuting.
We have a question in chat. It says, is there any cost for any of these?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we mostly try and break even in our catering costs and our charging. But we've also found that if we charge a small fee, that people are more likely to show up and not cancel last minute. And so the Carpentries workshops here at UW-Madison through the Data Science Hub, they're the full 2-day workshop where we teach for 2 full days or 4 half days. That's $10 for people who are at UW-Madison. And then we have a government nonprofit educational institution outside UW fee that's $100. Yeah. And then finally, anyone who's not affiliated with one of those two places, it's $300 total that's the full 2-day workshop. The half-day workshops, like the one that is the full version of today's session, is usually half that. So we charge $5 for UW. Well, actually it's a quarter that, but we can't go less than $5. So it's $5 for people who are associated with UW-Madison, and then $25 for government, nonprofit, educational institutions, and then $75 for folks who are outside either of those groups.
Sounds good.
And again, our fees are mostly to support our community overall. So we spend the money that we collect on catering for in-person events, sometimes special things for thank you gifts for instructors, etc., and paying our Carpentries membership, which allows us to keep training new instructors and staying involved in the community that develops these lessons.
So then there is a subscription needed for coming to sessions, or how does that work?
So it's per workshop, the fees that I just mentioned. So you pay for whatever workshop you're interested in attending. The UW-Madison has a membership with the Carpentries Global Organization, which is a nonprofit based in the United States, but it's also a community of instructors across the globe. And we pay that membership fee through actually some volunteer work through the Carpentries, and then the fee that we collect, we pay some of it, the remaining fee that way, to maintain a membership that allows us to, in theory, run workshops cheaper, although we actually run them for free anyway. Mostly what we use our membership for is to train new instructors here at UW-Madison. So we're able to continue to develop instructors' skills.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Anybody else has any questions for Sarah or Chris? I have one more, so if that's okay. So you have virtual as well as in person. Do the virtual ones get recorded, or do you have any on-demand?
That's a good question. We do get a lot of people asking about recording. We have actually hesitated to record any of the virtual workshops so far, mostly because our workshops are very interactive, where learners are asking about their problems, they're interrupting with I get this strange error, or what does this mean, or how do I do this? And so we found that people are a little less likely to participate actively if you're recording them. And so maybe today is an example. And so we don't record our workshops. We make them in person and active. However, as I mentioned before, all of our materials in some form are open on the web. So everything we're teaching is something that you can self-paced go through on a website on your own if you want to. And we also have every week coding meetup, although actually it's canceled for today, but it's Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2:30 to 4:30, that people can just drop in. So you've attended a workshop and you need help applying what you've learned to your own work. You come to coding meetup and we'll help you write some Python code, get that Git repository set up, etc. To do that. And that's open for people who are going through the materials that are openly available online too. So if you don't attend a workshop, but you're working through the Carpentries materials, people can drop in and ask questions about them directly.
That's virtual? That's virtual?
Yes, those are virtual. Although we've been tempted to have some in-person sessions eventually, I think we'll always keep the virtual aspect because people like joining coding meetup wherever you are. The way that works actually is that you join the Slack channel, and Chris put how to join the Slack channel and come to coding meetup in chat. You join the Slack workspace, and there's a channel called Coding Meetup that's staffed between 2:30 and 4:30 Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then you can post in I have a problem with R, and somebody replies back and is like, hey, I'll start up a Zoom call with you and we can look at it together.
Cool. Now there is a question in the chat. David is asking, are there options for deploying Streamlit apps from a GitLab repository instead of GitHub?
Oh, this is a good question, David. I actually forgot to mention that you can deploy the app directly from GitHub. I believe it's possible to do from GitLab as well, but I'd have to look up to be absolutely certain. But I think they have support for both GitLab and GitHub.
Okay, any other questions? All right.
Oh, I think I'm wrong about the GitLab one because the application I found says that might not be possible.
Okay.
So, but you could create your local GitLab repository, and then I think you can directly deploy it to RStudio Connect if you used RStudio Connect. It won't be deploying from the web. It would be deploying from your initial deployment of it. But I think that you could still create a repository that has all your information in it.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds like something to dig into.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, so if there are no other questions from audience, then we're gonna conclude this session. It was very exciting. I really enjoyed, this session. I will definitely go back and look at when the video comes out. But yeah, for everybody, if you have, you can, I'm sure that you can send your questions to the speakers if you have any. And we have lots of great sessions coming up. So take a short break and we will see you again soon. Thank you very much. You have a great rest of the day.
Thanks all.